There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Revelation. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. So we're in the book of Revelation, the apocalypse, and that comes from the Greek word apocalypsis. In our culture, we often think of the four men of the apocalypse, the four horsemen, or we might think of the movie Apocalypse Now, that it's a time of chaos and catastrophe. Very, very scary. And we identify this word with the end times and the last days, where everything is out of control. But the word apocalypse means the unveiling. It's the Greek word apo, which means away from, and then calypso, which means covering. So what it means is the taking away from the covering, the unveiling, or revealing, like the word revelation. So when I think of unveiling, I think of the dance of 1,000 veils, because I grew up in the 60s and they had these movies with belly dancers, and they would have this risque dance and they would remove these 1,000 veils. But this is more like the taking off of a tarp or a covering from like a car, revealing the car underneath and bringing that car into the light for everybody to see. And so to the believer, the apocalypse will only be an unveiling. But to the unbeliever, it'll be very catastrophic, and it'll be a time of a lot of chaos. And so now you have to think, well, what is this book revealing? And you kind of would think, well, it's revealing a lot. It's revealing the Antichrist and the kings and their kingdoms and Mystery Babylon and the beast and the false prophet. All these crazy things that are gonna come into our future. That's what it's revealing. And that's all true. It does reveal all these prophetic and futuristic events, also all these judgments of God. But if that's all you got out of this book, you would be missing the whole intent of the book, because it's Jesus Christ who is the object of this book, and it's Him who the book is revealing. And so what we're going to have here is this private showing of the real glorified Jesus Christ in heaven. And we're going to see His relationship to our future in heaven. And that's what's going to be revealed to us. God's sovereign purposes in this world. Or basically, you can think of it, it's going to reveal to us the end of the story. So this book is kind of like a spoiler alert, where you're watching a movie and someone comes and they tell you the ending, because that's what we're seeing here. We're going to see the ending. And if this was a movie, it would be very, very uncool to do this. But with this story, it's a blessing, because it's going to keep us from freaking out and not knowing what's going on when we see all these things happening around us, because we do live in the last days. But now we know how the story ends. Okay. And so now this revelation, it wasn't given to the world, because you can read it here where it starts. It says, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave Him to show His servants. So God gave this revelation to Jesus Christ to show us about the things which must shortly take place. And so this book, it's predictive prophecy. And you have to realize that this book has been out for about 2,000 years, and it still says it's going to shortly take place. So the Bible's term for shortly is a little bit different than how we think of shortly. But the Greek word that's translated shortly here is the word takai. And that's where we get our word for tachometer. And so it means speed. So it means quickly and suddenly. So it's not so much that it's going to happen shortly, but that when it does happen, it's going to be fast. It's going to be quick. It's going to be like a tachometer revving up. And so there's a lot of people, and they think this book, that it's not easily understandable, and that it's a closed book, like the book of Daniel. We know that God told Daniel to shut up the word and to seal up the book, and you can read that in Daniel chapter 8, verse 28. And Daniel's vision was closed because that vision was for a later generation. It wasn't for his generation, but it was actually for our generation. But this is not a closed book. This is an open book because God, he wants to reveal these things to us. So these things aren't hidden because these are the things for us to know because these things are at hand and they will be happening shortly. But because of all the symbolism used, a lot of people think that this book is basically not understandable. And that in this revelation, that any symbol can mean just about anything you want it to mean. And if you've been around for a while, you've probably heard people's imaginations just running wild with this text, that everything in here is a symbol for something else. Like, well, that means tanks, and that means machine guns, and that's a nuclear bomb. But that's not true here. John does not use a lot of symbolism just for the sake of symbolism. What he's talking about are things that are real, and these are real, actual things that relate to real things. 500 of these symbols in the book of Revelation, they're actually described and they're found in the Old Testament. But sometimes here, John, he's just using this symbolic language to give us a greater visual picture. Where John, he could have just said, a world leader. But instead, John says, he's a beast. Or he could have described the Babylonian false religious beliefs as just Babylon the Great. But John calls this false religion, he says, it's the great whore who rides the beast. And so John uses this type of symbolism, and in this case, he does it to contrast between Babylon's whorish beliefs to the church's pure beliefs in calling the church a bride. And so some of these symbols, they're found in the Old Testament. And some of these symbols, they're explained right here in the text, either by Jesus or by an angel. But some of these symbols are never explained, and we just kind of have to wonder what they mean. But a lot of what John is describing here is just what he sees. It was just the only way that he could describe it. He could only describe it in the symbolic language. But all he was doing was describing what was unfolding right in front of him as he saw it. And so it was the only language he knew, though it's very vivid language, like things like a woman being drunk with the blood of the saints. And so we're told that this revelation of Jesus Christ was given to Jesus by God, and then it was sent by his angel to his servant John. Okay, so this is the Apostle John. So he's the one we know. He's the one who wrote the Gospel of John, and he also wrote the letters, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. So this is one of Zebedee's sons. This is one of the sons of thunder. And he's the one who called himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. And now this John, he's an old man, and he's the last surviving apostle. Because this book was written in about 96 AD, and John, he's getting close to being about 100 years old. And it's been about 60 years since John has seen Jesus, and all the other apostles, they've died. They've all been martyred. The first of them was his brother James, and he was beheaded. And then there was Matthias, and he'd been tied down, and he'd been eaten by vultures. And then there was Thaddeus, who was shot full of arrows as he was being crucified. And then there was Nathanael, who was skinned alive before he was crucified. And then there was Philip, who was hanged, and Andrew was crucified. Matthew was beheaded. James Alphaeus, he was thrown off the roof of the temple. Thomas, he had been impaled on a large spike. And then there was Simon the Zealot, who was sawn into pieces.
And then you'd have Mark, who is the writer of the Gospel of Mark. Well, he'd been dragged behind a chariot until dead. And then Luke, the writer of the Gospel of Luke, he had also been crucified. And then we know that Paul, the apostle, he had been beheaded. And Peter, he was crucified upside down beside his wife. And so here we have John, he's lost all the people he knew back in the day. And he's the last disciple who has seen the risen Christ. And now all the others that he knew, they've all gone on to glory. And so now you have John, and he's left with this new generation of believers. And all of this new generation, none of them are eyewitnesses. And he's partaking with them this ongoing persecution from the Roman Empire. And this persecution, it started with the Emperor Nero, who really came from this really messed up home where his mother hated Nero's father. And so Nero's mother, she poisoned him, but she poisoned him by sending Nero in, who was just a little boy of 9 years old, with a plate of poisoned vegetables. And so Nero, he saw his dad die right in front of him. But then, since that time as a boy, he starts this killing streak. And from this very young age, he started killing friends when they disagreed with him. And then he killed 3 of his wives, and then he killed his own mother. And all of that happened before he was 19 years old. And then by 31, Nero, he slit his own throat, but he didn't die. So this is the same Nero who had been witnessed to by the Apostle Paul twice. And he hated Christians so much that by 68 AD, it's estimated that he had killed over 3 million Christians. And he killed them just for entertainment. He did it by tying them up in animal skins and to be killed by other beasts. And then he burned them alive, put tar on them, and he'd light them up in his garden, and then he'd ride through his garden naked. And so this Nero, he died in 69 AD. And he was replaced by Titus Vespasian. And this is that Titus that had destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and actually destroyed the city of Jerusalem, which happened in 70 AD. But this Titus and this emperor, he was a little kinder to the Christians. And then he was replaced by his son, who was Titus Jr., because he named him after himself. He was also another Titus. But he only lived for about 2 years. And then he was replaced by his younger brother, Domitian. Now, Domitian, he hated Christians even more than Nero did. Nero, he only persecuted the Christians in Rome, but Domitian, he persecuted them throughout the whole Roman Empire. And this Domitian, what he did is he claimed to be God and demanded the people to say, Caesar is Lord, instead of Jesus is Lord. And so a lot of Jews and a lot of Christians, they died because they couldn't say that. They couldn't say Domitian was Lord. And now, with Jerusalem being gone, the Apostle John, he takes Mary, which was Jesus' mother, and he went up to Ephesus, which is in Turkey, and he became the elder in the church of Ephesus. And so John, he's overlooking all the churches in Western Asia.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.